Thomas Merton Center was born in 1972, and it was during the Vietnam War, and a group of very principled people, mostly clergy, decided that they would start this center where we would talk about social justice and protest the war. The Vietnam War found Molly Rush, one of our founders, hammering on the nose cone of a missile with the Plowshares 8. And she ended up in federal prison for a while. There's now a book that's written about her called Hammer of Justice that we recommend to everyone. And that was quite an auspicious beginning. Climate change has made a big impact on social justice. We now have to practice more compassion than we ever have had to in the past. When we talk about mitigation and fossil fuels and keeping 80% in the ground and divestment and everything that we can do to keep that 80% in the ground, we also have to talk about adaptation, something we really hate to talk about because it sounds like, oh, you're just going to get used to it. But that's where social justice will really come into play, and human rights. An environment is not a backdrop. You know, our oceans there's acidification of our oceans, and our rivers are being polluted. We only have 1% of the world's water is potable. And so we started to emphasize what this meant when people were making decisions for their communities and for whole nations without taking the earth and everything on it into consideration.
The younger generation that's coming up today really sees the connections between a lot of the major forces at play and a lot of the major struggles for justice that we see. We see that the face of environmental justice, the reason that there is quite often so much environmental degradation, is because of the lack of economic justice that we have, and the fact that it's multinational corporations who are usually conducting the bulk of the world's environmental damage. We see that the forces of war are just another face of that same thing, and we see that, you know, quite often the result of this is the lack of basic human rights to things such as water. And so I think in that way, I think that there's a lot more of a natural connection for folks, and I think that frankly, current events such as the tragedy that's happened to the water supply in Flint, the assassination of Barda Caceres in Honduras, those type of things just show how interconnected different issues are, and how we can't just continue to operate in silos around this issue or that issue as activists, but we really have to come together as a larger community and with the larger community to really push back against a lot of these unjust acts that are occurring.
I think that the conversation between sustainability and social justice in the future will be between young people coming together and saying, what kind of a world do I want to live in? Merton Center has always been made up of ordinary people with great ideas, you know, that all point to a future that isn't the one we have today. We are all change makers. We talk about a global commons where everybody is living and being sustained together, and it's when we talk about the sky, we talk about the earth, we talk about the future, we're talking in a totally different way, that these are the things we have in common and that we can really care about each other and everybody else in the world, and know that everybody loves the place that they live in. Everybody loves their home.
you're making the bank available to people. How are you actually changing the way the bank itself operates?
The people who work for us truly believe in advancing a set of progressive causes. I think one of the most innovative things that we did is we looked at the situation that bank workers in this country face. And it's a dirty little secret that in the wealthiest, most successful industry in the country, the financial services industry, you have an army of low-wage workers. Average wage for a bank teller in this country is a little more than $12 an hour. There's a sea of security guards and food service workers and back office workers who make a little more than minimum wage. We raised our minimum wage to $15 an hour. We indexed it so it would go up every year, and we've challenged the rest of the industry to do the same.
Well, that really is a pretty dirty secret. This enormously wealthy industry. What proportion of your tellers did you find out were on public assistance?
Well, in New York State, about 40% of bank tellers are on some form of public assistance.
So you were the first bank to raise the minimum wage across the board. You've also established this list of priorities. I think you're calling them principles.
We should embrace economic justice, and we should stand up for things like fair wages, not just for bank employees, but employees all across the country, and we should be a loud, progressive business voice calling on progressive policies like that. We need to embrace transparency. We should be open in terms of how we make money and be open to sharing a portion of our profits with the kinds of causes that we believe in. And most importantly, and I think not to be forgotten, one of those principles is that regulation is not the enemy. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people out there clamoring that there are too many regulations inhibiting the banking industry. But we saw what happened when regulation wasn't strong, and we need to make sure that we have good consumer protections and good ways to keep the banking system safe and sound for future generations.
Social justice is a fair and just relation between the individual and society. This is measured by the explicit and tacit terms for the distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity and social privileges. In Western as well as in older Asian cultures, the concept of social justice has often referred to the process of ensuring that individuals fulfill their societal roles and receive what was their due from society. In the current global grassroots movements for social justice, the emphasis has been on the breaking of barriers for social mobility, the creation of safety nets and economic justice. Social justice assigns rights and duties in the institutions of society, which enables people to receive the basic benefits and burdens of cooperation. The relevant institutions often include taxation, social insurance, public health, public school, public services, labor law and regulation of markets, to ensure fair distribution of wealth, equal opportunity and equality of outcome. Interpretations that relate justice to a reciprocal relationship to society are mediated by differences in cultural traditions, some of which emphasize the individual responsibility toward society and others the equilibrium between access to power and its responsible use. Hence, social justice is invoked today while reinterpreting historical figures such as Bartolomé de las Casas, in philosophical debates about differences among human beings, in efforts for gender, racial and social equality, for advocating justice for migrants, prisoners, the environment, and the physically and mentally disabled. While the concept of social justice can be traced through the theology of Augustine of Hippo and the philosophy of Thomas Paine, the term social justice became used explicitly from the 1840s. A Jesuit priest named Luigi Tuparelli is typically credited with coining the term, and it spread during the revolutions of 1848 with the work of Antonio Cerbati. In the late Industrial Revolution, progressive American legal scholars began to use the term more, particularly Louis Brandeis and Roscoe Pound. From the early 20th century it was also embedded in international law and institutions. The preamble to establish the International Labour Organization recalled that universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice. In the later 20th century, social justice was made central to the philosophy of the social contract, primarily by John Rawls in A Theory of Justice, 1971. In 1993, the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action treats social justice as a purpose of the human rights education,